10 states that could break away from the US in the future. Every empire falls. Every border shifts. No nation lasts forever. History has proven this time and time again. Hey everyone, let's be real, nothing in this world is truly permanent. We like to think of the United States as unshakable, but history tells us otherwise. Borders change, countries split, and sometimes what seems impossible today becomes reality tomorrow. So in today's video, we're diving deep into a fascinating question: could certain US states actually break away in the future? Secession, it's a word that stirs up political debates, historical echoes, and maybe even some heated family arguments at the dinner table. Now, we're not saying this will happen next week or even in our lifetime, but the idea isn't as far-fetched as it sounds. From economic struggles to cultural divides, some states have the unique ingredients that could one day push them toward independence. So buckle up, because in this episode of The Journey of Wisdom, we're exploring 10 states that just might consider going their own way. This is a journey into the cracks of a divided America, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. Number 1. Vermont, the republic that never forgot. Vermont, nestled in the picturesque landscapes of the northeastern United States, is a state that has always marched to the beat of its own drum. Famous for its breathtaking natural beauty, world-renowned maple syrup, and a deep-rooted culture of independence, Vermont has a history unlike any other. Before it joined the Union in 1791, Vermont was its own independent republic for 14 years, complete with its own government, currency, and identity. This legacy of self-reliance and autonomy still echoes today in the state's politics and way of life. While most of America follows the broader national trends, Vermont has never been afraid to go its own way, embracing progressive policies that often put it ahead of the curve. Universal health care, early marijuana legalization, and a strong commitment to environmental conservation are just a few examples of how Vermont prioritizes its values over federal norms. This distinct mindset has fueled ongoing conversations about secession, with groups like the Second Vermont Republic advocating for the state to break away from the United States entirely. They argue that Vermont's independent spirit and values no longer align with those of the federal government, making self-governance a more appealing alternative. While this movement remains relatively small and most residents are content within the Union, its very existence speaks volumes about Vermont's deeply ingrained belief in self-determination. The idea of secession may seem extreme, but at its core, it highlights a broader question that many Americans wrestle with today: how much influence should the federal government have over the lives of individuals and communities? In an era of political division and increasing dissatisfaction with centralized power, Vermont's independent streak serves as a reminder that self-governance and local control are powerful forces that continue to shape the nation's landscape. Whether or not Vermont ever takes steps toward breaking away, its unique political identity will always set it apart as a state that values autonomy above all else. And perhaps in an ever-changing world, that mindset is something more states might embrace in their own way. Number 2. Hawaii, a kingdom with a history of sovereignty. Hawaii's story is unlike any other state in the US, and that's what makes its potential for secession an ongoing discussion. This isn't just another state that joined through expansion. Hawaii was once an independent kingdom with a thriving culture, a monarchy, and a deep sense of sovereignty. That legacy still lingers today, shaping how many Hawaiians view their place in the United States. And the U.S. annexation of Hawaii in 1898 remains a highly debated event. Some believe it was a legitimate political move, while others argue it was an outright illegal takeover of a sovereign nation. This unresolved past fuels a passionate, though relatively small, sovereignty movement. Some groups advocate for complete independence, while others seek a redefined relationship with the USS-1 that acknowledges Hawaii's unique history and cultural identity. But it's not just about history. Geography also plays a role. Separated by thousands of miles of ocean from the mainland, Hawaii often feels like a world of its own. This physical isolation strengthens the idea that Hawaii is different, both in culture and governance. Polynesian traditions, the Hawaiian language, and a deep connection to the land give many locals a sense of belonging that goes beyond being part of the United States. For some, this fuels the argument that Hawaii should have greater autonomy or even regain full independence. And when you consider modern challenges, rising costs of living, reliance on mainland imports, and debates over land use, it's easy to see why discussions of self-governance continue. Now, let's be real. Hawaii actually breaking away from the US is highly unlikely. The economic and political obstacles alone would make secession incredibly difficult. But the fact that this conversation still exists tells us something important. History leaves lasting wounds, and the desire for self-determination is not easily silenced. So, what does this mean for Hawaii's future? Should past injustices be acknowledged in a more meaningful way? Should the US rethink its relationship with its island state? These are complex questions with no easy answers, but one thing is certain: Hawaii's story is far from over. Perhaps the real lesson here is that history, identity, and governance are deeply intertwined, and the voices calling for recognition should not be ignored. Number 3, Alaska, the isolated, self-reliant state. Alaska, the last frontier, a land of breathtaking wilderness, rugged independence, and a spirit unlike any other. Now, imagine a place so vast, so distant, that it feels almost like a nation of its own. Alaska isn't just another state, it's closer to Russia than it is to Washington, D.C., and this sheer remoteness has shaped a culture of resilience, self-reliance, and a deep-rooted identity that sometimes feels separate from the rest of the United States. Doesn't it make you wonder what would happen if Alaska ever decided to go its own way? This isn't just speculation. The idea of Alaskan independence has surfaced time and again, fueled by geography, history, and a sense of autonomy that runs deep. The state's natural wealth is staggering: oil, timber, fisheries, resources that could, in theory, sustain an independent economy. But who really controls this wealth? Here's where things get complicated. The federal government owns over 60% of Alaska's land, placing huge restrictions on how resources can be used. To some Alaskans, this feels like a form of distant colonial rule, an outside power deciding the fate of a land that should be theirs to govern. And history backs this sentiment. Alaska wasn't always part of the United States. It was purchased from Russia in 1867, a deal many Americans mocked as Seward's folly at the time. Yet today, some Alaskans see staying in the United States as the true folly, believing they could thrive as an independent nation. But is that really the case? While independence sounds bold, reality paints a different picture. Alaska depends heavily on federal funding for infrastructure, healthcare, and essential services. It also receives financial benefits from programs like the Permanent Fund Dividend, which pays residents a share of oil revenues, something that would be uncertain in a post-secession world. Plus, despite its independence streak, Alaska is deeply tied to the lower 48 states for trade, security, and economic stability. Could Alaska truly stand alone, or would it struggle in ways not yet fully realized? The Buddha once said, "With our thoughts we make the world." In other words, ideas have power, but they must be grounded in wisdom. Secession may capture the imagination, but would it bring the prosperity and security Alaskans seek? Or is it an illusion, a dream that fades when faced with the harsh realities of governance, economy, and global politics? Perhaps the real question isn't whether Alaska could leave, but whether it should. What do you think? Would Alaska thrive on its own, or is its best future still within the United States? Number 4. California. Economic giant with political friction. California, the Golden State, has long been a beacon of ambition, a land where dreams are chased under the glow of Hollywood lights and fortunes are built in the innovation hubs of Silicon Valley. It has shaped culture, technology, and even politics in ways that ripple far beyond its borders. But for all its influence, California has always walked its own path, often at odds with the federal government. With its progressive policies on immigration, climate change, and social issues, California has developed a political identity that frequently diverges from the national agenda. It's a state that prides itself on pushing. This independent spirit has led some to question whether California could ever truly stand on its own. After all, with the 5th largest economy in the world, larger than that of many nations, the idea of self-sufficiency isn't entirely far-fetched. The state's GDP surpasses that of the United Kingdom, and its industries, from technology to entertainment to agriculture, are global powerhouses. It's not just an economic juggernaut, it's a cultural titan, shaping music, film, fashion, and even political movements that spread across the world. Yet, the road to secession is fraught with complexity. The US Constitution doesn't provide a clear path for a state to leave the Union, and history has shown that breaking away isn't just a matter of economic strength or political will. It's a legal, social, and logistical labyrinth. There are those who dream of a Calexit, a future where California governs itself without federal oversight, free to craft policies aligned with its values. But for every advocate of independence, there are countless others who see strength in unity, recognizing the deep interconnections between California and the rest of the United States. Federal funding, military defense, and even water rights create bonds that aren't easily severed. And then there's the question of identity. While California may be different in many ways, it is still woven into the fabric of the American story. The Civil War taught us that the Union is not something easily undone, and the struggles of other regions seeking independence, whether Scotland from the UK or Catalonia from Spain, serve as modern reminders of how challenging secession truly is. As we consider California's unique position, we are reminded of an old Buddhist saying, "No matter how strong the tree, it cannot grow alone in the desert." Strength and independence are admirable, but interdependence often brings resilience and stability. California's push for autonomy is, at its core, a reflection of a broader human struggle, the balance between individual freedom and collective strength. In life, as in politics, we must ask ourselves, when does breaking away lead to growth, and when does unity offer the greater path to progress? As tensions rise and states redefine their roles within the nation, one thing remains certain: the future is never set in stone, and the choices we make today shape the world of tomorrow. Whether California stays or goes, its influence will be undeniable. But perhaps, as with all things, wisdom lies not in division, but in the ability to work together despite our differences. If you've watched up to this point, you've delved deep into predictions about the future of the United States. Comment below with Future Map to share your thoughts on these potential divisions. But don't go anywhere. There are still many eye-opening insights ahead. Stay until the end to see which states could actually reshape the map of the United States. Number 5. Texas, the Lone Star State's fierce independence. Texas, the Lone Star State, has always carried an air of independence, almost as if it's a country within a country. The name itself speaks volumes, a reminder of a history that Texans hold close to their hearts. Think about the Alamo, a symbol of defiance and resilience, a moment in history that still fuels the spirit of Texans today. But this independent mindset isn't just about history or pride, it's backed by economic power. Texas isn't just another state. If it were its own nation, it would boast the 10th largest economy in the world. Tech, energy, and agriculture drive this powerhouse, creating an economic backbone strong enough to support an independent identity. And with that kind of financial muscle, it's no wonder some Texans wonder what life would be like without Washington calling the shots. But beyond economics, there's something deeply ingrained in Texan culture, a fierce, almost defiant self-reliance that's reflected in everything from their politics to their way of life. The phrase "don't mess with Texas" isn't just a catchy slogan, it's a way of thinking. Texans value personal freedoms, limited government, and the ability to chart their own course without interference. That independent streak has often led to friction with federal policies, from regulations to taxation to debates over state rights. For some, these tensions raise an interesting question. If Texas has the economy, the resources, and the will, could it ever actually break away from the United States? The idea might sound extreme, but history shows us that radical shifts often start as whispers before they become movements. Of course, the practical challenges of secession are massive. Legal hurdles, economic adjustments, military considerations. Breaking away from the US wouldn't be as simple as just drawing a new border. But what's undeniable is that Texas has a unique identity, one that's deeply rooted in the idea of self-determination. And in a time when political divides seem to be growing wider, when states and regions are increasingly questioning the role of the federal government in their daily lives, Texas remains a place worth watching. Could it happen? Maybe. Would it be easy? Definitely not. But if there's one thing history has taught us, it's that Texas has never been afraid to go its own way. So, what do you think? Is Texas' independent spirit just a cultural attitude, or could it one day become something more? One thing's for sure when it comes to Texas, the conversation about independence is far from over. Number 6. South Carolina, a history of secession. South Carolina. Just hearing the name brings to mind images of deep-rooted history, southern charm, and, let's be honest, a fair share of controversy. If you've ever wondered which states might seriously consider breaking away from the US in the future, South Carolina is often the first to come up. But why? Well, this is a state with a history of standing its ground. After all, it was the first to secede from the Union in 1860, a move that set off the Civil War. Of course, today's world is vastly different from the 19th century, but echoes of that past still linger, shaping the political and cultural landscape of the state. The question is, could those historical undercurrents ever translate into a modern-day push for independence? One of the key factors behind the idea of secession, however distant or unlikely, is the deep-seated pride and strong sense of identity that many South Carolinians hold. This isn't just about nostalgia, it's about a belief in self-governance and limited federal control. Like many southern states, South Carolina has long valued the idea of local governance, with many people feeling that decisions affecting their lives should be made closer to home rather than in Washington, D.C. This state rights mindset doesn't necessarily mean that people are plotting to leave the Union, but it does create an ongoing tension between state and federal authority. Have you ever wondered how much power the federal government should really have over individual states? That's a debate that never fully goes away, especially in places like South Carolina. Another element fueling the conversation is the skepticism toward federal policies that some believe interfere too much in state affairs. Whether it's economic regulations, social policies, or taxation, there's a persistent belief among some South Carolinians that the state would be better off with more autonomy. While most people in the state aren't actively calling for secession, the idea remains a topic of discussion in certain circles. And let's not forget that South Carolina has a history of pushing back against federal authority, from resisting certain federal mandates to championing policies that emphasize state control. But could that ever evolve into something more serious? Is there a point where frustrations with federal policies could push a state to take drastic action? Of course, while these sentiments exist, the reality is that secession is incredibly complex, legally, economically, and politically. The U.S. Constitution doesn't provide a clear pathway for a state to leave, and any attempt to do so would face massive legal challenges, not to mention economic uncertainty. South Carolina, like all states, is deeply intertwined with the national economy, and breaking away would create countless logistical nightmares. But even if actual secession remains a distant and improbable scenario, the fact that these discussions continue to pop up reminds us that history has a long shadow. Number 7. Florida, a unique cultural and economic power. Florida, the land of endless sunshine, sprawling beaches, and, let's be honest, some of the most bizarre headlines you'll ever read, it has long been a state that dances to the beat of its own drum. But beyond the Gators theme parks and late-night news stories that make you double-check if they're real, there exists a quieter but persistent notion, one that asks whether Florida could ever stand on its own as an independent nation. While this might sound like something out of a political thriller, the idea isn't completely baseless. The whispers of secession, though faint, are rooted in economic strength, cultural distinctiveness, and the occasional political standoff with Washington. And when you take a closer look, it's easy to see why some Floridians entertain the thought, even if only as a what-if scenario. Economically, Florida is a powerhouse. Tourism alone rakes in billions, with Disney World, Miami's nightlife, and the Keys drawing visitors from all corners of the globe. Add to that its massive agriculture industry, producing everything from oranges to sugar cane, and a steady influx of retirees pumping money into the local economy. and you have a state that arguably holds its own better than most. In fact, Florida is one of the few states that consistently pays more in federal taxes than it receives in federal funding. This financial imbalance fuels the argument that Florida could sustain itself without Washington's oversight, as some believe that the money funneled into the federal system could be better spent serving local interests. When people feel like they're giving more than they're getting, questions about independence tend to arise. But the conversation isn't just about money, it's also about identity. Florida is a fascinating blend of cultures, from the deep-rooted Latin American influence in Miami to the old-school Southern traditions in the Panhandle. This cultural melting pot creates a distinct character, one that doesn't always align with the broader American identity. There's a sense of uniqueness, an independent streak that makes some wonder if Florida would be better off forging its own path. Whether it's the laid-back island vibes of Key West or the high-energy hustle of South Beach, Florida often feels like a world of its own. And when a place starts to feel different enough from the rest of the country, the idea of breaking away even hypothetically can start to gain traction. Then there's politics. Florida is no stranger to making national headlines for its political clashes, often standing at the center of major legal and ideological battles. Whether it's disputes over federal regulations, controversial state policies, or election drama that keeps the entire country on edge, Florida has a history of pushing back against Washington's influence. Some of these tensions feed into the broader discussion of state autonomy, a sentiment not unique to Florida, but certainly alive within its borders. However, while the thought of Florida seceding makes for interesting debate, the reality is that a full-blown exit is highly unlikely. The logistical and legal challenges alone would make it nearly impossible, not to mention the economic and defense considerations that come with breaking away from the United States. But here's the bigger picture. TSA, Jan. Florida's situation reflects a wider trend across several states, a growing desire for greater autonomy and a questioning of how well the federal government truly represents local interests. It's not just about one state wanting to go solo, it's about people feeling unheard, communities wanting more control over their futures, and a broader shift in how Americans view the relationship between state and federal power. And in a world that's constantly changing, where economic shifts, cultural evolution, and political divides seem more pronounced than ever, these discussions are bound to continue. Whether or not secession ever becomes more than just talk, one thing is clear: states like Florida will always have a strong sense of independence, and that spirit isn't fading anytime soon. Number 8. Washington, the tech-driven powerhouse. When we talk about states that like to do things their own way, Washington is one of the first that comes to mind. And no, not the one with the White House and political gridlock. We're talking about the other Washington, the one draped in lush forests, fueled by an endless supply of coffee, and home to some of the biggest tech companies in the world. This state has long marched to the beat of its own drum, embracing progressive politics, environmental consciousness, and an independent spirit that sets it apart. It's a place where innovation thrives, diversity is celebrated, and challenging the status quo is just part of everyday life. Oh, and did we mention they even have their own rainforest? That alone makes them unique. But Washington isn't just about scenic beauty and a free-thinking mindset. It's also an economic powerhouse. Tech giants, aerospace leaders, and a thriving trade industry make it one of the most financially self-sufficient states in the country. Companies like Microsoft and Amazon have shaped not just the state but the entire world, and Seattle's bustling port keeps goods moving in and out at an astonishing rate. With so much economic strength, it's not hard to imagine Washington standing on its own if it ever had to. Would it? That's another question entirely. Secession isn't something that happens overnight, and realistically, Washington breaking away from the US isn't likely in the near future. But if history teaches us anything, it's that change is always possible. In a country where political and cultural divides seem to be growing, states with strong identities and resources may start to consider their options more seriously. And Washington? It has everything it needs to survive and even thrive on its own. Whether it ever takes that step or not, one thing is certain: this state will continue to lead, innovate, and challenge the norm in ways that set it apart. So, what does this mean for the bigger picture? It reminds us that independence isn't just about breaking away. It's about strength, resilience, and the ability to shape one's own future. Whether as part of the US or on its own, Washington has proven that it can stand tall. And that raises an important question. In a rapidly changing world, what does true independence really look like? Washington is a powerhouse of innovation and independence. With its tech giants, strong economy, and unique culture, it stands out. But what does true independence really mean in today's world? Comment below. Independence is about strength and self-sufficiency. What do you think? Number 9. New Hampshire. Live free or die mentality. If there's one state that embodies the independent spirit, it's New Hampshire. Think about it, this is a place where live free or die isn't just a catchy motto on a license plate, it's a way of life. The people here value self-reliance, personal freedom, and a healthy skepticism of government control. Even the wildlife seems to have picked up on it. It's almost like the squirrels are watching for signs of federal overreach. But jokes aside, New Hampshire has a long history of marching to the beat of its own drum. It's home to the first-in-the-nation presidential primary, which means it plays a crucial role in shaping national politics, but always on its own terms. The state has a strong libertarian streak, with many residents advocating for minimal government interference in their daily lives. Town meetings here aren't just a formality, they're a deeply ingrained tradition where local decisions are made by the people for the people. And let's not forget its history. Even pirates once found a home here, adding another layer to its rebellious past. If the political landscape of America ever shifted towards states striking out on their own, New Hampshire wouldn't just be participating, it might be leading the charge. Of course, that doesn't mean secession is happening anytime soon, but if the conditions were right, could you really be surprised if New Hampshire took the opportunity to carve its own path? Would the state's independent mindset and history of defying norms make it one of the most likely candidates to go solo? And if so, what would that look like for the rest of the country? Number 10. Oregon. Progressive and independent-minded. Oregon has long been a state that marches to the beat of its own drum, a place where the rugged individualism of the frontier meets the progressive ideals of modern America. From the misty coastline to the towering forests of the Pacific Northwest, Oregon embodies a spirit of independence, one deeply rooted in its values, culture, and history. While it doesn't have the same secessionist legacy as some other states, make no mistake, Oregon is a place that values its autonomy, but often moving in a direction that diverges from the broader national current. This is a state that has led the charge on major social movements, from environmental conservation to LGBTQ rights, drug decriminalization, and renewable energy initiatives. It's a place that embraces change, often ahead of the curve, making it a fascinating candidate for any discussion on states that could potentially break away from the US in the future. Oregon's commitment to independence is not just a political stance, but a cultural way of life. The state's deep environmental consciousness is woven into its identity, with strict land use policies, aggressive carbon reduction goals, and a passionate dedication to sustainability. This isn't just policy, it's a philosophy, a way of living that reflects a broader ethos of self-reliance and responsibility for the land. The words of the Buddha come to mind: just as a candle cannot burn without fire, men cannot live without a spiritual life. Oregon, in many ways, has cultivated its own kind of spiritual life, one that revolves around nature, progressive values, and an ongoing effort to shape its own destiny. Its people have consistently pushed the envelope, legalizing recreational marijuana long before the rest of the country caught on, decriminalizing small amounts of hard drugs in an attempt to shift from punishment to rehabilitation, and standing at the forefront of alternative energy adoption. These policies may be controversial to some, but they highlight a broader trend. Oregon is unafraid to experiment, to challenge conventional wisdom, and to redefine what governance can look like. But perhaps what truly sets Oregon apart is not just its policy choices, but its attitude. There's a certain defiant charm in how the state carries itself, a willingness to embrace eccentricity and reject the status quo. The state motto, "She flies with her own wings," says it all. Oregon is comfortable leading itself, even if it means standing alone. And if national divisions ever reached a boiling point, it's not hard to imagine Oregon stepping away, not with hostility, but with the same laid-back irreverence it's known for. "We'll just be over here." You can almost hear them saying, brewing craft beer, hiking in the forests, and doing our own thing. Of course, the idea of any state breaking away from the US remains speculative, and secession is no simple matter. It comes with massive legal, economic, and geopolitical hurdles. But the deeper lesson here isn't just about whether Oregon could secede. It's about the importance of independence, both for a state and for individuals. There's something to be learned from Oregon's spirit and encouragement to think for yourself, to live in alignment with your values, and to embrace the uniqueness that makes you who you are. In life, as in politics, there will always be pressures to conform, to follow the herd, to suppress your true nature for the sake of fitting in. Oregon reminds us that sometimes the greatest strength lies in daring to be different, in forging our own path, even when the world raises an eyebrow. So whether or not Oregon ever takes steps toward true independence, its real power lies in the lesson it offers to us all: stay true to yourself, honor your principles, and never be afraid to stand apart. As we've explored, the idea of states breaking away from the US isn't just a fantasy. It's a conversation rooted in history, culture, and shifting political landscapes. While secession remains highly unlikely for now, these discussions remind us of the deep divisions and evolving identities within the country. At the heart of it all is a lesson in change. Nothing stays the same forever, and history is always being written. The real question isn't just whether these states could secede, but what their growing calls for independence say about the future of the United States as a whole. What do you think? Could any of these states truly go their own way? Or is unity still the strongest path forward? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this video interesting, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Journey of Wisdom. And be sure to turn on notifications so you don't miss our upcoming videos exploring history, philosophy, and the world's biggest questions. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.